All right, guys, this is standard 7.3b, technically. It's the second half. This video deals with the Pacific Front. If you're looking for the war in Europe, you're looking for the first standard 7.3 video, and you can find that on my webpage. We're dealing really with what happens between the United States and Japan in this section, and this one is much shorter than the first one. So let's get into it. The United States, in order to win against Japan, used a strategy called island hopping. You probably have heard of this before, or maybe you've heard of this. The idea was that if we can take control of one island in the Pacific that the Japanese held, and use that as a base to launch the next attack, and use that as a base to the next, and the next, and the next, when eventually we can get close enough to Japan that we could launch some bombing raids and then ultimately, use the bombing raids to soften up Japan, and then send a bunch of troops in to invade. That's the plan. I just mentioned that we want to get close enough to launch air attacks and then invade. The problem is that initially Japan was the one taking land in the Pacific, not us. So this map shows you we're moving from here in, but since the 1930s, Japan had been moving first from China to the Philippines to southeast Indian Ocean across. So we're going to have to do something in order to beat the Japanese. There's going to have to be some kind of a turning point. That turning point comes in the Battle of Midway. Midway is a naval station that's basically halfway between the United States and Asia. It was used as a refueling point for a long time because that's a long trip across the Pacific. The Japanese had the idea that if they could knock out Midway, in addition to Pearl Harbor, which is already out of commission since late 1941, we won't be able to stop them. The difference is that we actually intercept their plans and we lure them into an all-out assault, but we have plans to counteract their assault, and we're actually able to surprise them and defeat them very, very soundly at the Battle of Midway. This puts Japan on the defensive because now we're able to start moving into territory that had been controlled by Japan. So the Battle of Midway is a huge point. Now, as we move across these islands closer and closer to Japan, some of the last two are the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. These two battles, I'll just tell you, the South Carolina standards don't say much about, but they're worth going and doing some reading about, or maybe watching a couple movies, and there are some great ones out there. But Iwo Jima and Okinawa are very, very hard-fought battles. They're both small islands, and you would think they're not going to be all that difficult to take because of their size, but the Japanese fight to the last man. They refuse to surrender. And this is something that makes us stop and think, because if the Japanese are fighting to the last man to defend an island that's only about 5 miles wide, which is the size of Iwo Jima, what happens when we invade Japan? How many people are we going to lose? See, the Japanese mentality was that you never surrender. So if 100 American troops surround one Japanese man and everybody else in his troops have died, he would rather pull the pin out of a grenade, commit suicide, and take a number of American troops with him than to surrender to the Japanese. Well, you extend that to the invasion of Japan itself, and we start thinking that maybe we need a different plan. In class, I talked about this. This isn't in the notes. There's some stuff about the Philippines that I love because I live there and my wife lived there. You can ask me about this if you're very interested, but you don't need to know it for the test. So I'll skip it for now. Because we realize that the invasion of Japan is going to be a very serious event, we meet with Britain and Russia and we say, what can we do to make this happen? And Russia says, we will help you invade Japan. What we'll do is we'll send troops from, believe it or not, this is Russia. This is as far, southeast as Russia extends, touches Korea here. We'll send troops from Russia into the northern part of Korea. Now, at the time, there was no North and South Korea, but the Russians will send it into northern Korea. It was all one Korea at the time. So Russia does march into Korea, and they ready the invasion of Japan. Now, when this happens, around the time this happens, Franklin Roosevelt has a stroke and he dies. President Roosevelt is gone, so the vice president, Harry Truman, who you see here, becomes the president. And Harry Truman is faced with the decision to send over 1 million Allied forces into Japan to take on the Japanese. And he says, this is going to be horrible. And some statisticians at the time say we may lose over 1 million, or there may be over 1 million deaths as a result of this. Harry Truman decides instead to use a new type of bomb that's been developed throughout the war called the atomic bomb. In order to demonstrate its power and to convince the Japanese to surrender, he authorizes its use on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The Japanese aren't quite sure what to do with this, and so they hesitate. They do not immediately surrender. Because they don't surrender, we make the very difficult choice to drop another bomb on the Japanese city of Nagasaki. Between the two of these cities, almost 100,000 Japanese people lose their lives, and not a single American soldier has stepped foot on Japan at this point. The Japanese see this power and realize that they cannot withstand another type of assault like this. They have no weapon that would match the atomic bomb, and so they have to surrender unconditionally without a single troop setting foot, or a single soldier from America setting foot on Japan, which is kind of an amazing feat. So at this point, the war is over. The Germans have surrendered. Hitler commits suicide, actually. The Japanese have surrendered. So you would think that life is good, except now we have a problem. Russia has set up shop in eastern Germany. They've set up shop in the northern part of Korea. The Russians now know that we have an atomic weapon that we didn't tell them about until we set it off in Japan. And that makes them really wonder if we are trustworthy and whether or not we would ever use the bomb on them. That leads to an arms race. Russia says we need to have some kind of a weapon like this if our now enemies, because the war is over and we're no longer friends, if the United States has a bomb, we need one too. So this is going to begin an arms race between the countries, and it's going to be a difficult peace, I suppose you could say. This will lead into the Cold War, which we will talk about in just a little while. I hope this is helpful. As always, shoot me an email with any questions you have. I'm sure there are things that I didn't discuss as well in this video as I did in class, so I'm happy to help you. Thanks for watching.